In the heart of 16th century Italy, amidst the rolling hills and cobblestone streets, stood a convent, its walls centuries old, its corridors silent except for the echoes of whispered prayers. But behind these sacred walls, a darkness lingered, a mystery so chilling that it would haunt generations for centuries to come. It was the year 1592 when Sister Isabella, known for her piety and unwavering devotion, walked into a corridor of the convent and vanished. Not into the gardens, not through a door, not even through a window. She simply disappeared, as if swallowed by the very stones around her. The convent was thrown into chaos. Nuns screamed, their prayers turning into frantic cries. The abbess, a stern woman of faith, ran through the halls, desperately calling her name, but the only answer was silence. It was as if the convent itself had swallowed her whole. What makes this disappearance so extraordinary isn't just the suddenness, but the impossibility of it. Every wall was solid, every door locked, every window accounted for. There was no hidden passage, no secret escape. Sister Isabella's disappearance defied logic, reason, and every law of nature known at the time. Historians, priests, and scholars have puzzled over this mystery for over 4 centuries. Some whisper of divine intervention, an angelic abduction for her unwavering devotion. Others hint at a curse, a punishment for some unseen sin hidden deep within the convent's walls. And yet skeptics argue it may have been human cunning, a carefully planned escape, a secret lover, or even foul play orchestrated in the shadows of religion and power. But whatever the explanation, one truth remains undeniable: Sister Isabella vanished, and the walls of her convent became a silent witness to a crime, or miracle, that would baffle every mind that dared question it. Tonight, we step into the cold corridors of history to retrace the footsteps of a nun whose fate defied explanation. We will uncover the strange events leading up to her disappearance, examine the chilling accounts of those who witnessed it, and explore the dark theories that historians, priests, and paranormal experts have debated for centuries. Prepare yourself. As we venture into the shadows of the convent, the line between the possible and the impossible begins to blur. Because some mysteries are not meant to be solved, and some disappearances are never meant to be forgotten. To understand the mystery of Sister Isabella's disappearance, we must first step back into the daily life of the convent she called home. Perched atop a hill in northern Italy, the convent was both sanctuary and fortress, a labyrinth of stone corridors, echoing halls, and chambers that had witnessed decades of devotion, secrets, and whispered confessions. The nuns of this convent lived by strict rules, governed by the abbess's iron hand. Each day began with prayers before dawn, followed by chores, study, and contemplation. The walls of the convent bore witness to lives of devotion, but beneath the pious exterior, tensions simmered quietly. Rivalries, envy, and fear existed alongside faith, quietly shaping every whispered word, every glance exchanged in the shadowed corridors. Sister Isabella was a figure of admiration and curiosity. She was young, radiant, and deeply devoted to her faith, known for her ability to calm the anxious, heal the sick, and inspire hope among her sisters. But there were whispers too. Strange coincidences followed her. Flickering candles that refused to stay lit, sudden cold drafts in warm chambers, and the eerie sensation that unseen eyes were watching her. Some nuns claimed that Isabella spent hours praying alone in corridors where no one should have been. Others said she spoke softly to someone unseen, an invisible companion, perhaps a spirit, perhaps a figment of her imagination. The abbess dismissed these tales as hysteria, yet even she could not explain the mysterious scratches on walls and doors near Isabella's favorite chambers, as if something or someone had clawed at the stones from within. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Isabella's behavior changed. She became withdrawn, often staring at the walls as if listening to a conversation no one else could hear. On one particularly stormy night, several nuns reported hearing her singing a hymn, but not in the convent's usual voice. It was haunting, otherworldly, almost as if her voice was coming from within the walls themselves. Historians who later examined these events noted that the convent was built over ancient foundations, some claiming that hidden crypts and forgotten tunnels lay beneath the stone floors. Could Isabella have stumbled upon one of these hidden spaces? Or had she crossed a threshold between the visible world and something far more sinister? Even within the convent, the shadows seemed alive. Candles would extinguish without reason, doors would slam shut on their own, and footsteps echoed where no one walked. The atmosphere was thick with fear and awe, and yet Isabella walked calmly through it, unafraid, as if she were aware of a secret that no one else could see. It was on such a night, with the wind howling and the ancient stones groaning under the weight of centuries, that Sister Isabella disappeared. She had been seen leaving the chapel after her final prayer, a serene look on her face, yet in the span of moments she vanished. Was it a human hand, a divine act, or something beyond comprehension? By the time the nuns realized she was gone, the convent had become a place of panic and superstition. Some claimed that those who looked too closely at the walls later felt a cold hand on their shoulders, or heard a whisper that would follow them for days. Sister Isabella's life was one of devotion, but her disappearance would forever intertwine faith, fear, and the unexplained into a legend that would haunt the convent and the generations of nuns who came after her. When Sister Isabella failed to return to her quarters the following morning, a sense of dread rippled through the convent. At first, the nuns thought she might have simply taken a longer walk through the gardens or spent extra time in prayer. But as the hours passed, the reality of her disappearance settled like a cold fog over the stone walls. The abbess, a stern and devout woman who ruled the convent with unwavering authority, ordered a thorough search. Every corridor, every chamber, every nook where a shadow might conceal her was examined. The nuns moved in hushed panic, their footsteps echoing against the ancient stones, their whispered prayers trembling in the cold air. But there was no sign of Isabella. Even stranger, the walls themselves seemed to resist the search. Doors that had always opened smoothly now groaned as if alive. A faint draught seemed to drift from areas that should have been sealed. The convent's massive library, filled with tomes on theology and natural philosophy, offered no clues, only the lingering scent of candle smoke and old parchment. The abbess called for the local villagers, fearing foul play. Families and guards scoured the convent grounds, surrounding gardens and nearby woods, yet not a trace was found. No footprints, no disturbed foliage, no evidence that she had passed beyond the convent's gates. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Rumors began to circulate among the villagers, whispers that spread faster than the morning light over the hills. Some claimed Isabella had been taken by spirits. Others believed she had discovered a secret in the convent that someone or something did not want revealed. The nuns themselves were divided. Some feared she had been punished for questioning the abbess, while others were certain that her devotion had brought her closer to a divine truth, a truth that transcended human understanding. The abbess, despite her outward composure, could not ignore the strange occurrences that followed the disappearance. The walls that Isabella had loved seemed to hum with a faint, mournful sound. Candles flickered wildly, and a chill that could not be attributed to the stone floors crept through the hallways. Some nuns reported hearing Isabella's voice calling softly from behind the walls, a voice that grew fainter with each passing day, leaving a hollow echo that haunted their prayers. Local authorities were eventually involved, though their understanding of the supernatural was limited. Guards combed the convent, questioning the nuns and examining every possible entry and exit. They found nothing. No hidden tunnel. After Sister Isabella's disappearance, the convent was no longer the quiet sanctuary it had once been. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, and the stone walls, once silent witnesses to centuries of devotion, now seemed alive with secrets. The nuns, who had spent their lives in disciplined routine, began to notice subtle disturbances that could not be explained by natural causes. At first, it was small things, a candle left burning in the evening that would inexplicably be found extinguished the next morning, or the faint scent of roses in corridors where no flowers had been placed. The abbess, who had dismissed such occurrences as coincidence, could no longer ignore them. Bells would chime without touch, doors would creak open on their own, and a faint tapping sound would echo from the walls late at night. Some nuns swore they saw a shadow moving at the edge of their vision, always disappearing when they turned to look. These phenomena were not merely inconvenient, they were terrifying. In the convent's chapel, the nuns reported feeling sudden chills during prayer, as if a cold presence were passing among them. Manuscripts fell from shelves for no reason, and ink spilled across sacred texts. The convent's library, once a haven of knowledge, became a place of unease, its quiet corners seeming to whisper secrets that no mortal could comprehend. The most disturbing occurrences were the whispers. At first, they were subtle, barely audible, a murmur of Isabella's name carried through the cold stone corridors. But soon, the whispers grew more distinct, almost conversational. Nuns spoke of hearing Isabella asking questions, calling for help, or reciting prayers they had never taught her. At times, the voice seemed sorrowful, at times urgent, but always haunting. One night, Sister Margaret, the youngest and most devout of the convent, claimed she had seen Isabella through the walls. She described a figure, cloaked in white, floating silently behind the chapel's arches. Her voice trembled as she recounted how the figure seemed trapped, reaching for something unseen before fading into the shadows. The abbess, though skeptical, could not deny the fear in Margaret's eyes or the conviction in her words. Even the local villagers began to report strange sightings. Some claimed to see a figure in white moving through the convent gardens at night, while others spoke of eerie lights appearing in windows where no candles had been lit. Rumors spread that Isabella had not vanished, but had been taken by a force beyond comprehension, a punishment or a calling that none could explain. Religious authorities sent investigators and scholars hoping to uncover a rational explanation. They examined every inch of the convent, searched for hidden chambers, and even consulted local folklore. Yet, the more they studied, the less they understood. The disturbances defied logic. Windows would fog as though breathing from within the stone, footsteps echoed without source, and doors slammed in patterns that suggested communication rather than chaos. The nuns' faith was tested like never before. Some believed Isabella had become a messenger, a spirit warning them of unseen dangers. Others feared she had been trapped in some purgatorial state, her soul tethered to the convent by forces both sacred and sinister. Prayer and ritual seemed to bring only temporary calm. The manifestations would return, relentless and inexplicable. Over time, the convent developed a reputation far beyond the village. Travelers and curious onlookers came seeking evidence of the supernatural. Some left convinced they had witnessed the impossible. Others, terrified, refused to speak of what they saw. Within the convent, life continued under a shroud of uncertainty. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper was a reminder that the world they knew was not the only world that existed, and that sister. Isabella's fate was intimately entwined with these unseen forces. The Skinwalk convent had become a place of living mystery, a nexus where devotion and the unknown collided. Each night, the nuns prayed not only for their salvation, but for understanding, seeking a glimpse of the truth behind the walls where Isabella had vanished. And as the shadows lengthened and the whispers continued, one unshakable fact remained. Whatever force had claimed her was still present, still watching, still waiting. As the unnerving disturbances continued, whispers among the nuns began to turn into fearful speculation. There was talk of hidden chambers, rooms sealed for centuries, locked behind iron-bound doors and stone walls. Some believed these were places where secrets were kept too dangerous to reveal, while others feared they might be the very reason Sister Isabella had vanished. The abbess, initially resistant, could no longer ignore the growing unease in her convent. She gathered the sisters and shared an old legend that had been passed down among the convent's elders, a tale of the forbidden chambers. According to the story, these chambers had been constructed during the convent's earliest years, before even the oldest nuns were born. They were said to contain relics of a dark past, objects imbued with spiritual power, manuscripts written in cryptic scripts, and artifacts whose purpose had been forgotten by time. Entry into these rooms was forbidden under penalty of excommunication, yet curiosity gnawed at the hearts of the sisters. Sister Margaret, still haunted by the shadowy figure of Isabella she had glimpsed, became obsessed with uncovering the truth. Night after night, she would wander the corridors, following faint whispers that seemed to call her toward the sealed doors. One evening, she discovered a small, iron-studded door hidden behind the organ in the chapel. Unlike the grand entranceways to the abbey's wings, this door seemed almost to resist notice, blending perfectly with the stone. Its surface was etched with intricate symbols, worn by centuries, but still eerily legible under the flicker of candlelight. With a mixture of fear and determination, Margaret tried the lock. It held fast. Yet, as the hours passed, the door seemed to respond to her presence. A low hum emanated from the other side, vibrating through the floorboards. She could hear faint voices, some desperate, some pleading. The abbess, sensing Margaret's inner turmoil, forbade any further attempts. But the young nun could not let go. Each night she returned, guided by instinct and the relentless pull of something beyond comprehension. Finally, one stormy night, lightning illuminating the convent in blinding flashes, Margaret discovered a hidden key, its iron surface cold and etched, with the same symbols as the door. With trembling hands she inserted it into the lock. The door groaned, stone dust falling to the floor as it slowly swung open. Inside she found a chamber, unlike anything she had imagined. Walls lined with ancient manuscripts, shelves holding jars filled with unidentifiable substances, and relics that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. At the center of the room lay a stone pedestal, upon which rested a small, intricately carved box. The box emitted a faint glow, illuminating the chamber with an otherworldly light. Margaret approached, heart pounding, as whispers echoed around her, growing louder with each step. She felt a presence behind her, a weight pressing against her back as if unseen hands were warning her to leave. Yet the compulsion to understand was irresistible. Upon lifting the lid of the box, a sudden gust of wind extinguished her candle. In the darkness, Margaret felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched, and then a whisper, clear, urgent, and filled with sorrow, uttered a single name: Isabella. The realization struck her like lightning. Sister Isabella had not merely disappeared. She had been drawn into these chambers, bound by forces that were older than the convent itself. Margaret stumbled back, the box clattering to the floor, spilling a faint, shimmering powder that seemed to dance in the candlelight. Shadows twisted and writhed along the walls, forming shapes that were almost human. She knew in that instant that the forbidden chambers held not only answers, but dangers beyond comprehension. Whatever had taken Isabella was still there, lurking among the relics and whispers, waiting for the next soul daring enough, or foolish enough, to enter. Margaret could not rid herself of what she had seen. The image of the stone pedestal, the glowing box, and the final whisper of Isabella's name haunted her. It was as if the chamber itself had marked her, tethered her spirit to the mysteries it concealed. Her dreams were invaded by whispers in ancient tongues, and shadows that crept along the walls seemed to reach for her while she slept. Each morning she awoke drenched in cold sweat, a silent terror gnawing at her resolve. Yet, beneath the fear, a relentless curiosity drove her forward, a need to uncover the truth that she knew could consume her entirely. One evening, as the sun sank beneath the Tuscan hills, casting long shadows through the convent's arched windows, Margaret discovered an old diary hidden within the abbey's library. Its pages were brittle, ink faded by centuries, yet the handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to Sister Isabella herself. Margaret's hands shook as she opened the tome. The first entries were innocuous, recounting daily prayers and routine duties, but as she read further, a darker narrative emerged. Isabella had written of voices that spoke in the night, of footsteps echoing when no one else was awake, and of visions that seemed to pull her toward the convent's deepest corners. The diary hinted at the forbidden chambers long before Margaret had discovered them. Isabella had written of doors that should not exist, of symbols etched in stone that glowed under the light of candles, and of relics that seemed to hum with a life of their own. Each entry grew increasingly desperate, her words a frantic dance between fear and compulsion. Isabella had felt a presence guiding her, drawing her closer to the chamber, warning and enticing her at the same time. And then the entry stopped abruptly, ending mid-sentence, as though the pen had fallen from her grasp. Margaret realized with growing horror that Isabella had not left voluntarily. The whispers in the convent were not simply echoes of imagination. They were fragments of Isabella's final moments, trapped within the walls and corridors she had vanished into. Each shadow that moved along the corridor, each cold gust of wind, carried the memory of what had happened, and perhaps the intent to repeat it. Determined to understand, Margaret began piecing together the diary's clues. The writings referenced old convent rituals, cryptic symbols, and alignments of light that would reveal hidden doors at precise times of day. She learned of Isabella's fascination with the Abbey's oldest relics, objects said to hold spiritual power beyond human comprehension. And, most chilling of all, the diary contained warnings, phrases scribbled in margins, cautioning against succumbing to curiosity. The walls remember, the shadows do not forgive. Once drawn in, the living become whispers. Night after night, Margaret walked the convent silently, listening to faint murmurs that seemed to echo from the stones themselves. Each whisper carried fragments of Isabella's voice, hints of secrets she had uncovered, and pleas that were never meant to reach the outside world. And yet, through the fear, Margaret felt a growing certainty. If she could decipher Isabella's notes, if she could understand the chamber's ancient warnings, perhaps she could uncover not only the fate of her lost sister in faith, but also the truth behind the dark forces that had haunted the convent for centuries. The convent, once a place of sanctuary, had become a labyrinth of memory and malevolence. And as the candlelight flickered in the silent halls, the whispers grew louder, forming words that only Margaret could comprehend. Isabella's story was not yet finished. She had become a voice in the shadows, a guide and a warning. And now Margaret knew, with an unshakable certainty, to uncover the truth, she would have to follow those whispers into the very heart of darkness. The abbess had always been a figure of authority, her presence commanding the convent's every movement. Yet, after the incident with the forbidden chambers, even she seemed altered, her serene composure tinged with an unspoken dread. Margaret noticed it first, in the way the abbess's eyes lingered a moment too long on the closed doors of the inner sanctum, her lips pressed in silent warning, her footsteps hesitant, along corridors that had once been familiar. There was a weight to her shadow now, a darkness that seemed borrowed from the stones themselves, as if the Abbey had begun to twist and claim those who governed it. Margaret had learned enough from Isabella's diary to know that curiosity was both a key and a trap. The abbess, she realized, carried the knowledge of generations, secrets that were woven into the convent's very walls. Late one evening, while the Abbey was bathed in the pale glow of the moon, Margaret followed the abbess into the depths of the lower halls, careful to remain unseen. She watched as the abbess stopped before a heavy oak door, tracing the carved symbols with her fingers, murmuring prayers in a language Margaret could not understand. The air grew cold, the candles flickered violently, and a whisper seemed to rise from the floorboards themselves, speaking in tones both mournful and commanding. The abbess turned abruptly, her eyes catching Margaret in the shadowed corridor. But instead of scolding, she spoke with a voice that trembled, barely audible. "You are drawn too close, child. The walls, they hunger for knowledge, for devotion, for surrender. Once they choose you, there is no escape." Margaret's heart pounded, yet she could not look away. The words, heavy with meaning, confirmed the suspicions she had feared to voice. The convent was alive with a consciousness older than any of its inhabitants, and the abbess had long ago learned to coexist with it, to bow to it in ways the other nuns could not understand. Days passed, and Margaret observed changes in the abbess that were subtle, yet terrifying. Her sleep became erratic. Shadows clung to her presence, curling around her robes like smoke. She spoke to walls that seemed to respond, and sometimes, late at night, Margaret could hear her reciting fragments of incantations that chilled the blood. The abbess was no longer merely a guardian of the convent. She was a servant to something unseen, a mediator between the living and the whispers trapped within the stones. It was during one of these nights that Margaret witnessed something she could never unsee. The abbess, standing before the forbidden chambers, raised her hands and began to chant in low, rhythmic tones. The walls shifted imperceptibly as if breathing, the air thick with a pressure that pressed against Margaret's chest. From the darkness emerged faint shapes, indistinct but unmistakably human, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. Whispers filled the air, echoing the voices of those who had vanished centuries before, including Isabella. The abbess' eyes glowed faintly in the candlelight, reflecting a knowledge that was both ancient and terrifying. Margaret realized then that the abbess had become a bridge, a living conduit through which the lost voices communicated. The shadows were no longer simply echoes, they were sentient, aware of every movement, every whisper of curiosity. And yet, There was a pattern, a logic to their actions if one could decipher it. Margaret knew she had to understand the abbess' connection to the chambers if she ever hoped to uncover the full truth of Isabella's disappearance. The next morning, Margaret approached the abbess cautiously. Her voice, though steady, carried the weight of fear and resolve. "Tell me what you know. Show me the way." The abbess studied her, her gaze piercing, measuring the courage, or perhaps the folly, in Margaret's request. Finally, she nodded. As if conceding, Margaret stepped closer, feeling the magnetic pull of the altar. The abbess began a low chant, a rhythm both mesmerizing and foreboding, the sound reverberating through the chamber and into Margaret's very bones. The shadows cast by the torchlight danced across the walls, stretching into impossible forms. Slowly, the veil was lifted from the object on the altar, a mirror, its surface dark and rippling like water, disturbed by an unseen hand. Margaret stared, and in its depths she saw fleeting images, a nun disappearing into a wall, faces pressed against stone, eyes wide with terror, and moments from her own journey reflected back in distorted clarity. "The rituals are not for the faint of heart," the abbess whispered, stepping beside her. "They are a dialogue with the forgotten. You must see without touching, understand without speaking. Only then will the convent yield its truths." Margaret's pulse raced as the abbess traced the symbols on the floor with her fingers, chanting in that ancient tongue. The energy in the room intensified, and Margaret felt the weight of centuries pressing down, as though the very air were alive with memory. As the ritual continued, Margaret noticed subtle shifts in the shadows. They began to take shape, forming figures that mimicked the movements of the living nuns, and yet moved with a deliberate, unnatural grace. These were echoes, remnants of those who had vanished over the centuries, bound to the convent by forces beyond human comprehension. Margaret realized that each ritual was a bridge, a temporary passage for these echoes to communicate, to act out unresolved moments, to whisper warnings or secrets hidden for generation. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity, yet Margaret remained steadfast, drawn deeper into the patterns, into the rhythm of chant and shadow. The mirror pulsed with a light of its own, illuminating fragments of the past, secret passages, hidden chambers, and the moments when nuns had crossed the threshold into the unseen. Margaret felt herself becoming part of the rhythm, her presence acknowledged by the shadows, her curiosity recognized by forces she could neither see nor name. Finally, the abbess ceased her chant, stepping back. The mirror's surface calmed, returning to its dark, reflective state. Margaret exhaled, her body trembling with exhaustion and awe. "You have seen," the abbess said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of the ages. "The convent has chosen to reveal fragments, but the full truth is never given freely. To uncover it, you must journey further into its heart, where the walls themselves remember every whisper, every act of devotion or despair." Margaret knew then that the forbidden rituals were only the beginning. The convent had tested her, drawn her into its rhythm, and allowed her a glimpse into its labyrinth of secrets. The next step would demand more courage, more resolve, as she moved closer to the truth of the nun who vanished into the walls, a truth the convent had jealously guarded for centuries. After the exhausting and mesmerizing experience of the forbidden rituals, Margaret felt an almost magnetic pull, guiding her deeper into the convent. The abbess, her eyes unreadable, gestured toward a narrow passage partially concealed behind an ancient tapestry depicting saints in eternal vigil. "Few have ventured here," the abbess said softly, "and fewer have returned with their minds unshaken. Step carefully. The labyrinth watches, and it remembers." Margaret hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the corridor. The air immediately shifted. It was cooler, damper, and tinged with a scent of earth and age. Every step echoed in the stone hallway, the sound bouncing off the walls as if the labyrinth itself were listening, judging. Flickering torches illuminated glimpses of intricate carvings along the stone, depictions of nuns walking into walls, hands reaching for unseen forces, eyes wide in silent terror. Margaret's pulse quickened. These carvings seemed to warn her, yet simultaneously beckon her forward. The passage twisted and turned unexpectedly, narrowing in some places until Margaret had to squeeze sideways to continue. The walls, cold and rough beneath her fingers, seemed to pulse faintly, like the beat of some enormous hidden heart. Shadows danced and twisted independently of the torchlight, forming shapes that resembled figures she could almost recognize. A flicker of movement in her peripheral vision, too fast, too deliberate to be her imagination, made her start. Was it a nun, or an echo of one who had walked this path centuries ago? At intervals, small alcoves appeared along the walls, each containing objects shrouded in cloth. Margaret dared to lift a corner of one veil and found an assortment of relics. Rosaries tangled in dust, prayer books with pages ripped and scorched, and personal items that bore intimate marks of their former owners. Each object radiated a story, a fragment of a life that had intersected with this labyrinth in ways that were never meant to be remembered. She felt a deep sadness, the weight of countless lives quietly trapped in these walls, each with its own unanswered questions. The labyrinth's corridors began to loop unpredictably, turning back upon themselves in impossible ways. Margaret tried to keep track of her path, but the more she walked, the more the walls seemed to rearrange subtly, as if the building itself were alive, guiding her, testing her. A faint hum began to rise beneath her feet, almost imperceptible at first, but steadily growing, a resonance that seemed to sync with her heartbeat. It was as though the convent itself were breathing, and she had stepped inside its chest. Then she came upon a junction. 3 passages stretched before her, one dark and narrow, one wide but lined with ominous carvings, and one partially collapsed, the stones appearing fresh, as if recently moved. The abbess's words echoed in her mind. The labyrinth watches, and it remembers. Margaret chose the middle passage, guided by a mix of intuition and fear, and immediately felt a shift in the air, thicker, almost electric. Her fingers brushed against the walls, and for the first time she felt them respond, the stones vibrating subtly, guiding her toward a hidden door concealed within the masonry. With a soft push, the door creaked open, revealing a chamber unlike any other. The room was circular, its ceiling vaulted, and the walls covered in a mosaic of faces, some serene, some twisted in agony, all staring, all waiting. In the center, a shallow pool reflected the torchlight, and within its waters Margaret caught the faint reflection of the nun she sought, her features twisted in silent desperation. The labyrinth had led her here, to the heart of its memory, to the place where the convent held the echoes of the vanished. Margaret knew now that the labyrinth was more than stone and passageways. It was the memory of the convent made tangible, a living, breathing archive of secrets, fears, and forbidden knowledge. Each corridor, each hidden door, each alcove told a story, and as she stepped further into the chamber, she realized that the next revelation, the truth of the nun who vanished into the walls, was finally within her reach, and the labyrinth had only begun to show her the path. Margaret stepped carefully into the circular chamber, her heart pounding in rhythm with the strange hum that seemed to resonate from the very stones beneath her feet. The mosaic faces on the walls, now clearer in the torchlight, appeared almost alive, their eyes following her every move, some pleading, some accusing. The shallow pool at the center shimmered unnaturally, reflecting not just the torchlight, but a faint, otherworldly glow that seemed to emanate from within the water itself as she approached. The reflection began to ripple, and the image of the missing nun, Sister Isabella, emerged. Her features were pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and longing, lips moving silently as if whispering secrets that could not be spoken aloud. Margaret leaned closer, mesmerized, and felt a chill crawl along her spine. This was no ordinary reflection. It was a window into the truth, a memory trapped in time. Margaret felt an inexplicable pull toward the pool, as if the water itself beckoned her to see everything, to understand everything. She gazed into its depths and witnessed visions of other nuns, other lives swallowed by the convent's labyrinth, their whispers rising like a chorus of sorrowful wind. The realization hit her with unbearable clarity. The convent preserved its secrets through fear and entrapment, twisting devotion into obsession, faith into chains. Every vanished nun, every strange disappearance, every shadow in the corridors was a warning and a consequence of seeking truths too dangerous for mortal eyes. The chamber began to shake, the mosaic faces distorting into grimaces of despair. Margaret understood that the labyrinth sensed her comprehension, that the convent itself was testing her resolve. She could either retreat, leaving its secrets intact, or Step fully into the revelation and face the consequences. Summoning every ounce of courage, she took a deep breath and pressed her hand against the shimmering pool. Instantly, memories flooded her mind. Isabella's final days, the whispers of the abyss, the rituals, the passages, the countless lost souls. Margaret saw the full horror and the brilliance of it all. The convent was alive, not just in stone, but in memory, a timeless entity sustaining itself through human devotion and fear. And yet, amidst the darkness, there was an undeniable thread of resilience, of those who had tried to resist, to remember, to escape. With a final, heart-wrenching glance at Isabella's apparition, Margaret stepped back, feeling the weight of knowledge settle within her. The nun's figure slowly dissolved into the shimmering waters, leaving only a faint echo, a whispered warning carried by the labyrinth itself. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Margaret knew she would leave the convent with truths that could never be spoken, experiences that could never be shared. The labyrinth had revealed its deepest secret, and though she survived, she was forever changed, bound by the memory of a nun who vanished into the walls, and by the haunting realization that some mysteries are alive and some secrets never die.